as we speak, the government is introducing the future Made in Australia legislation to Parliament. For more on this, let's bring in Liberal Senator Jane Hume. Morning, Jane. Great to speak to you. So what do you think of this plan?
Isn't it ironic that when Labor printed off the legislation for the Future Made in Australia bill this morning, they printed it off on paper that was made overseas. And that's because the last paper mill in Australia shut down under Labor. Let's face it, manufacturers are going to the wall. They've actually been going insolvent at triple the rate that they were just in the last 2 years alone. They're looking for an economic plan. They're not looking for spin. They're not looking for something to win elections. And that seems to be all that we've heard from the Future Made in Australia bill. What manufacturers are really looking for is lower
paper mills and
industrial relations.
The green industries seem to be, different situations. Paper mills, paper manufacturing, and the green industries that this bill tries to support. I mean, I've heard criticisms about the possibility of wasting taxpayers' money in sectors with, in which Australia doesn't have an advantage.
Well, that's exactly right. We're not sure what is in this bill, why it needs to be in a bill at all. Quite frankly, if it's about grants and incentives, well, they can be done without legislation. This seems to me to be a very big headline without all that much in the way of substance. There was already a National Reconstruction Fund that's been in place for 2 years now, $15 billion of borrowed funds, borrowed on behalf of the taxpayer. It hasn't expended a single cent yet. This is the real concern. What manufacturers need are lower energy prices. They need flexible industrial relations laws. They need deregulation, and they need lower taxes. That's what they're crying out for in an economic plan, not a great big splash tax incentives to industries to do what they were already doing, and particularly those that are run by some very wealthy individuals. Quite frankly, a future made in Australia is ridiculous when manufacturers are struggling to keep the lights on today. So I would like to see what the substance is of this bill, other than a $45 million advertising campaign. In fact, I will bet you that we see the ads for a future made in Australia before we see a single project funded.
Do you think that in the future Australia can have an advantage in those green industries that, in this bill there will be financial incentives to support?
Well, the only ones that we know about now is subsidies for solar panels, which,
hydrogen.
It looks like we will never be competitive in. Hydrogen is underway already. These production incentives, essentially it's a little bit like paying a barista an incentive to make your coffee. They're already making you a coffee. That's how a production incentive works. It's essentially a government subsidy for something that's already being done. So this is a real concern. Now, we haven't seen the bill yet. Once we'll have a look at the bill, but to me it looks a lot more like spin and vote, a vote-winning strategy or an election strategy as opposed to a genuine economic plan.
Now, earlier we were talking about the retailer plan. That is, there'll be tougher fines and also powers of divestiture for retailers, and talking about the dissent from, say, half of the Liberal MPs. What about you?
Well, I think that might be significantly overblown. Now, I don't talk about what goes on in party rooms or what goes on in shadow cabinets, other than to say that this is where we have an opportunity to present legislation and colleagues have an opportunity to ask questions about it. That's exactly what happened. This is a really important policy. Grocery prices have gone up 11.4% in the last 2 years alone under Labor.
But that's because inflation is happening around the world.
Concentrated section. Well, inflation is happening here in Australia far more than it's happening around the world now. In fact, inflation is going down around the world and it's still going up in Australia. That's why Michelle Bullock refers to it as a homegrown inflation problem. In the meantime, we have a highly concentrated market in the supermarkets, and we know that farmers and small business suppliers and consumers are potentially getting the raw end of the deal here. The powers that have been proposed by the Coalition simply add one more tool in the shed for the ACCC to use. It's a last response, it's not a first response. It's definitely a last resort policy, and it's got enough safeguards around it to make sure that should it be implemented, there has to be a consumer benefit for it at the end. We need to make sure that jobs aren't lost, that prices do the right thing, and that shareholder value is maintained. So there are safeguards around this policy.
Thanks so much, Jane.
Struck the right balance.
We'll see. Yep, we'll see what happens with this plan. Thanks so much for your time.